My name is Callum. The purpose of today's lesson, the third lesson actually in the series, is about what's happening in international law right at the moment. So the lesson will be focusing on that area. The first up, the key areas of the international law. Primarily, it's trade. There are multiples of contracts, dealings, pacts between nations with regard to business between the nations, trade. And we do have the WTO, World Trade Organization, at the top of it. So trade plays a huge part in international law. Along with commerce. Now what's that? That means any movement of goods and services between countries. Primarily that's common in terms of practices between the nations. Again, the impact of international law is on there. Peace does play a role, but sadly insufficient. So these are the three primary areas. Of course, we can put environment also in a certain way. Look at the norms and customs of the ancient past. What about the norms and customs today? We do have them. Look at the aspect of immunity from prosecution granted to a leader of a nation. It's a custom, practice, still today. Sovereign liability, that means when a nation gives a promise to another nation, irrespective of the government change, irrespective of the change of politics, the nation is expected to honor the pledge. Ancient custom, still going today, non-interference, non-aggression. These are all parts of customs and norms of the modern time. There's many actually. 2000 years ago, these empires were. But still, the impact is felt today. Roman Empire was the last to go, and the Greek Empire was a little bit before that. But the influence lasts. Take a look, first one, Jus Gentium, laws of the nations. Still, this has been a fundamental that has an impact on, the current international law between war or peace. It has an impact. How we make the treaties between the nations, Jus inter gentes, a Roman concept, still being utilized in many ways in the modern world. Take this for example. Rome had the jus naturale, that means automatic law, no matter whether you have it in the print or not, automatic laws. In the modern times, there are certain principles, certain rules that apply to the world, whether the country has a law on it or not, such as laws against genocide, action against crimes against humanity, war crimes, slavery. These are automatically illegal, automatically banned, and whenever such a thing happens, the world get together and punish the nation or the people behind it. We call it jus cogens. That came from the ancient times, Greek to Roman, right? Peremptory norms, higher laws, for which we don't need a law to be printed. The law will be activated whenever such a wrong happens in the world. Modern international law can be cut in a way to private international law and the public international law. What's private international law? Law that applies to the private people. Public, laws between the nations. What's this private international law? Normally when we leave a nation, we have to leave behind our national law because our national law applies to the boundaries, the territory of the nation, not beyond. But there's a law that we carry with it. Like what? Family, marriage, our contracts. They're valid when you move out of the country as well. And even when we are staying inside our nation, without moving out of the country, our commitment to the others outside the country with regard to the contracts, civil duties, such as not to cause negligence, not to violate their intellectual property, they're relevant. So what's that law? That's private international law. Law that a citizen needs to follow, be it inside the country or outside the country. A law that a citizen needs to follow when he moves out of the country. Back and forth. That's private international law. Any contract made anywhere is legally acceptable in a court system in another nation. Marriage of a Sri Lankan in Sri Lanka is accepted anywhere in the world. So, goes for the family law and other things as well. We cannot violate the intellectual properties of another person because Sri Lanka is a signatory to such a treaty on intellectual property and we have ratified it, so we are bound by it. So it's private international law. And there are so many other treaties like that where private individuals are bound. Apply across the borders. What about public? Yeah, that's deals, treaties, pacts, agreements between nations. That's public international law. It's in fact much more effective and much more deployed than we actually think. So we do have the international law pretty much in practice. It covers so many things in our lives. Trade, just we learned earlier. International crimes, there are plenty of international crimes. We'll be learning them a little bit later. And human rights, not enough, but the world is trying hard. Environment, there are a lot of environmental laws which covers. I was telling that the peace aspect, the human rights aspect is not exactly as much, but the efforts are there. Take a look at the International Court of Justice, a very old international court. Doesn't have the power to impose punishments, but highly influential. International Criminal Court is in operation, signed by many nations. So a citizen in one of those nations commits a war crime or genocide or crime against humanity, crimes against humanity, he could be punished in that particular court. It's a global court on crimes. Sri Lanka hasn't signed it for obvious reasons, but many nations, even USA, many powerful nations haven't signed it, but large number of nations have agreed to the International Criminal Court. War crimes tribunals, we've done it in Rwanda, we've done it in Yugoslavia. So the impact of it's felt. Trade, yes, earlier it was GATT, General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. It has developed into a much more effective organization called the World Trade Organization. As we learned earlier, much of modern international law is connected to trade, and WTO plays a huge role there. Look at the international crimes. Cyber piracy is a massive problem. You could commit the crime across the border there, right? You could be citizen in one place, plan the crime in another country, carry out the crime in another nation. Punishment for such a crime is international. You could arrest such people, bring them to different countries and punish them. Piracy at sea is a huge problem. Again, action could be taken by a number of international treaties in place. Arms control have been effective. We did have the threat of nuclear destruction in the world, nuclear winter we used to call it, and that was kind of negated thanks to a number of intercontinental ballistic missile treaties and nuclear non-proliferation treaties. They've been very effective. We passed that threat. Landmines treaty has been a key success story because this helped minimize the damage due to landmines across the world. Sri Lanka also signed this particular treaty. We have ratified it as well. Piracy in the seas, a developing problem, especially in the Gulf of Eden, Red Sea, big part of Indian Ocean. There's an international naval force in operation. Multiple navies working together in order to stem the threat of this piracy. Not just in the Indian Ocean, close to Red Sea, there are a couple of places like the Malacca Strait where this is an ongoing threat and the international treaties have come up against it. This is where Sri Lanka failed. Express Pearl, once its destruction happened, had we signed International Convention on the pollution of seas by the ships, we could have easily demanded compensation from this particular ship. Sadly, Sri Lanka hasn't fully agreed to the complete treaty. Excuse me. So that prevented us from getting the full compensation, but Marpol Treaty, we call it, is a law that has been fully utilized in many nations, something that Sri Lanka failed. Environment has been a law that has been very effective in terms of impact, because multiple treaties have come up in order to prevent the damage to the world and the ecosystems. Climate change is a huge one. Ozone Treaty has been very effective. Antarctic Treaty, one of the best treaties, and the Marpol. So, not just this, there have been a couple of other ocean treaties that has really helped the world. Look at this. This is one continent where the politics don't play. And the continent of ice, the Antarctic, is free from political wheel dealing or influences. Countries can only utilize it for scientific research purposes, and that's that. No one can claim the territory. It has been one of the most successful treaties ever, the Antarctic Treaty. Private international law. There are a lot of actions are taken against piracy. Has been controlled to a certain extent in 2006, 5, 6, 7, 8. That era there was higher degree of international piracy of the seas, particularly in the Indian Ocean. That has been kind of controlled, but cyber threat is a huge problem. This has been one of the biggest developing international crimes, as well as intellectual property violations. Laws have come up, treaties have been signed, but there's much need to be done in order to stem this threat. A success story back in 1960s, 70s, 80s, including into the 21st century, right? Think of the 9/11. Hijacking of planes have been a huge threat, but that has been curtailed and minimized thanks to most of the nation passing tougher laws against air piracy. Most of the nations agreeing to work together against air piracy. What you call is hijacking of planes. And those treaties have really helped to take strict action against, tough actions against any hijacker, leading to, very much of a minimizing of this particular threat. Seas have benefited from international law, maybe much more than the land. Multiples of laws have come up, international treaties. There are treaties with regard to, or rules with regard to the security or the safety of the ships. Oil carriers have very strict rules, container carriers have extremely tough rules, like the double hull and so many other safety features to prevent the pollution of the seas and prevent the pollution of oil spills. And then the territorial sea. What country can control which part of the sea? We do have the law of the sea. We call it the UNCLOS Treaty, or the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. In addition, there have been a number of treaties that we have signed to protect the marine species, from whales to the tuna fish to, so many others. So the seas have been covered a lot thanks to international law, but much need to be done, of course. Take a look at here. So this is technically, the types of seas that are fully coming within the nation, or certain part under the supervision of the nation, and part of the ocean where a nation has a chance to get economic rights. So it comes in as part of the UNCLOS, or UNCLOS, some people call it, United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. A highly effective law. Most of the nations have agreed to this. Now the problems. World has close to 90 million refugees at the moment. Most of them out of the nation, escaped out of the nation, living in rough. There are tens of millions of children. Sadly, we failed there. And continuation of a failure. Look at Syria, look at Libya, Iraq, now Afghanistan. There's a lot that international conventions, we do have international conventions on it, but very few nations are following it. And the wars between the nations, we have 60 conflicts, armed conflicts going on right now. Annually, more than 100,000 combatants die in the battlefield, soldiers or the guerrillas, or you name it. Again, the interventions have been there, but there's a lot that needs to be done. Sadly, the biggest culprits are some of the countries that sit in the most powerful international body of them all, United Nations Security Council. Take a look at USA, China, Russia, the wrongs that these nations are responsible of. And one huge reason for us in not being satisfactorily able to at least prevent the increase of wars or the conflicts has been the very nations that have a duty to prevent it. So that's something where much needs to be done on the human rights angle as well as peace and non-violence. Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan. It's a litany of problems where the international law failed. We have set up international coalitions where the forces work together in their war against terror. That's what they call it, but these wars against terror have done more terrorism than the terrorists themselves, considering the huge destruction to the world, or rather certain parts of the world, because of this, such as the Central Africa, Middle East, as well as Central Asia, Afghanistan. So this is a failing in international law. War against terror still going on, but the damage has been massive. International coalitions were there, right? Even Afghanistan was attempted to be administered by a number of countries sending their forces, troops. So that's international agreements, but somehow we failed. China, they're coming up with these artificial islands in areas where they have no right to set up these islands, way beyond their territorial seas. This is forcibly capturing ocean territory, clear violation of international law. Successes, yes. Let's not forget. Thanks to the International Whaling Commission, we've saved the whales from endangerment. In every sea now, we do have healthy whale populations. Still, countries like Japan and Norway are allowed to kill whales for scientific research, but the whales have recovered in numbers. Antarctic is still in news due to melting of the snow, but we've saved Antarctic from much harm, further damage. Africa, for that matter, there have been lots of fights going on inside Africa, but there have been a number of treaties that Africa set up among the nations themselves, like ECOWAS, or they've set up their own African Defense Force to somehow come to terms with the prevention of these internal conflicts in Africa that has troubled Africa for the last 70-80 years. So that's international law in practice. Has not been fully successful, but the impact of the effort is being felt. So it's in a way a success story. Now, without being involved by the foreign powers, Africa themselves try to come out, commit some kind of a solution, commit multiple solutions, in fact, between the nations. The world's most successful treaty, no question about it. Ozone Treaty. By 2050, world plans to close the ozone layer. We identified the ozone layer back in 1987, And immediately the world got together to set up a very, very effective treaty, followed by multiple protocols to extend the quality and the power of the treaty, in order to somehow prevent the release of the chlorofluorocarbon and other the gases that harm the ozone layer. Any harm to the ozone layer could cause damage to the world, ultraviolet rays, and might contribute to global warming. So this has been the most successful treaty in terms of impact. Has to be followed by other laws. Yes, the world is getting together. Just a month from now at Glasgow, we call it COP26. Fight against climate change is happening. This is the conference on climate change. So efforts are taking place. International law is being utilized, but of course much needs to be done.